Hello, friends. This is Alexi Bailey, and this is the Tell It Like It Is podcast. This is episode 45, and I have Daphnie Sicre. How are you, Daphnie?
I'm fine, and Sicre, Daphne Sicre. I'm good. I'm good. Just been really, really, really busy. But I'm good.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a million things happening.
I know. But it's worth it. It's worth it. It's worth it. Yes, yes.
So I really wanted to include my friends in the journey, that I'm embarking on. And the Tell It Like It Is podcast is a place for activists, people who care about the world around them, and want to coordinate with others so that we're on the same page,
Yeah,
moving in the same direction, right? Communication's important.
yeah,
And just a space to have the conversations about the work and what we're doing, what needs to be done, and what we can do better.
yes.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what's going on with you.
Well, I am an assistant professor at Loyola Marymount University. That's my paying job. And then I'm also an artist. I direct for multiple plays. Um, I'm also a culture consultant on a couple TV shows and a movie coming up, and just doing a lot of work that revolves around representation, identity, and representation. And I've been doing this work probably for almost 20 years. I'm a teacher. I started teaching in schools, and then I moved into academia, and I've been just working in multiple spaces and teaching about social justice and teaching about, again, representation and how do we really try to change at least my industry of entertainment. So that's a little bit about what I do. Um, I was born in Ecuador and I was raised in Spain to Peruvian and Spanish parents. So I spent a lot of time in Peru and spent a lot of time in Spain growing up. So it was always really interesting to be this intersection of two different cultures growing up. And I think that that's why my interest in identity and representation is so big, because when you grow up with two separate cultures, similar but separate cultures, you get to see lots of things. And then when you don't grow up in this country, you also get to experience lots of different things as well. When you come to this country, race is such a huge, huge determinant factor of who you are and where you're placed in society. And when they don't know where to place you because they don't know what you are, creates some bumps in the road. But they know you're not white, but they just don't know what you are. So it's been very interesting um, to navigate that. And that has pushed me to want to fight for better representation, more voices, more accurate stories in my field.
When you say representation, who do you represent?
Well, I'm a Latina and I'm mixed between white and indigenous. But I don't just fight for who I represent, I fight for people of the global majority that are not the ones that are being presented on films and plays and TV shows. They're not the ones that have been getting the leads. They're not the ones which stories that are about them. I mean, you're starting to see the change in the last 5 years, the growth and the difference. But, 15 years ago, most plays that were being produced, stories that were being told on TV, movies that had leads that were white. And so, where are the stories of those who are not? And when you actually look at us as a whole, whether it be someone who is Afro Latinx, whether it be someone who is Asian American, whether it is someone who is African American, whether it is someone who's from the Caribbean, when you gather all of these voices together, we become this sort of global majority. And so, where are our voices, and how come we're not the ones at the forefront?
Well, I definitely think that's an important work. Um, so the word that first comes to mind is white supremacy.
Oh, yes.
So I think the conversation has gone so many ways to the extent that, you know, the things that we're up against is the white minority struggling to stay
In
in
power.
power.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they will not let go of that power by all means necessary, even if it means destroying their own intersections, right? Even if it means women. Take a look at what's happening in some of these states that are trying to ban critical race theory. Um, I mean, if you look at Texas had a legislation that literally was going to ban the teaching of the women's suffrage movement, right? And you have white female Republicans that have no issue with that. And it's like, wow, you hate people of color so much that you're okay with banning the teaching of women's rights. Wow, 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 right? And like, that's just so, you're so against people of color that you're okay with banning your own history as a woman, right? You're okay with blocking the rights of women's bodies. Like you're okay with all these things, and all of that has to go with white supremacy, and being so entangled this web of white supremacy and power, and this fake ideology, even for white women, that they think they will remain in power and that men will not. That white men will take care of them because they're supporting white men, but it's a fallacy, and it's sad. But when you have people that are so strong in their beliefs, what are you going to do to fight it? What are you going to do to change it? And it's interesting to already start hearing there's been a slight interest in change of stories and what stories are being told. And already you're hearing actors be like, oh, I'm not, white actors be like, I'm not getting roles offered anymore. And I'm like, yes, you are. You absolutely are. Yes, please, don't, please. So it's really, really interesting too to sit there and be like, oh, they're only casting people of color. And I'm like, really? That's not true. That is not true. But you hear it. And like the fear is is very predominant. I'll say that.
The what kind of themes do you focus on in your theater, like in the work you've done so far?
So my dissertation focused on Afro Latinidad, and so it focused on what it means to be Black and Latinx on stage, especially in the United States. And I've been really focusing on working with Afro Latinx playwrights and helping them tell their stories as a dramaturg. And so that's I have a couple articles published about Afro Latinidad and some on the way. So that's exciting. I wrote one of the first dissertations in the country that focused on sorry that focused on Afro Latinidad in the United States for theater. And so
What are some
just
of the names right now in that theater that's doing the work?
there's so many. I mean, if I have a whole list, and I would hate having to name someone and leave someone out. I
Okay.
have a list of almost like 70 something Afro Latinx playwrights that are not up and coming anymore. They've been producing the work for years, and they have been just putting it out there and just doing just incredible, incredible stuff.
Years ago, I saw Platanos and Collard Greens.
Yes,
I can't say that I've seen a lot of. I saw In the Heights. Does that count? When it
yes,
was on
no.
Broadway.
I mean, so when it was on Broadway, it did have Afro Latinx actors in the performance, but again, similar to the movie, it did not have Afro Latinx actors in necessarily lead roles. And if it did, they were light skinned. And so the same thing happened when the movie came out this year. You did have Afro Latinx characters that were lead roles, but you did not have dark skinned Afro Latinx characters in lead roles. And so there was a huge, huge critique and criticism about that. And the problem also isn't just that, it is that there aren't enough musicals about Latinx folk. And so if you don't have enough musicals about Latinx folk, you're going to put all your eggs in one basket for one musical, and you're going to expect that musical to represent everyone and everything. And that's not possible. We need more musicals. We need musicals written by Afro Latinx folk. We need musicals written by everyone. We need more musicals and more stories so that we're not putting everything into one space. But they did cast Afro Latinos, but they were light skinned, and so much of that revolves around colorism and what colorism has done to our industry, what colorism has done to Latinos as a whole. There, and that again is rooted in white supremacy and colonialism. It is rooted in the colonist thought of coming into another, you know, the Spaniards coming into the, Latin America and destroying civilizations, people, and imposing their own views and values. And I'm half Spanish, so I can say these things, right? And people look at me, they think I'm insane, but I'm like, I'm half Spanish. I can say these things. And it's hard because you see the aftermath now. You see the aftermath X amount years later. You see how there's a hatred for skin color. You see why there has been this erasure of Afro-Latinidad throughout Latin America. You see why Afro-Latinos have not been represented in the media, in movies, in TV shows. And it wasn't until like 10, 15 years ago that we were seeing countries in Latin America admit their error, try to have some reconciliation, and starting to count the Afro Latinos within their own populations. And so that has had a trickle down effect in industry and who we see in TV and who we see in the news, all of those things. And so, of course, that's going to affect the industry, and of course, that's going to affect the stories that are being told, and of course, that's going to affect representation. And so, I think we are moving into a decade where we're starting to see those changes, and Afro Latinx playwrights and actors are starting to get cast, and not just and get cast as themselves as human beings, not get cast because of their race or not get cast because their skin is darker, but get cast in lead roles because they are the best actor for that lead role. And it's not about having all these light skinned actors on stage and saying that that's Latinidad, right? Like, what does that say when you erase folk or you put certain folk in the back, right? What does it say when you have 12 principal characters? They're all light skinned, and you put folks that are dark skinned in the background without the like it says something whether you want to admit it or not. It says something and it sends a message, and it sends a message to our youth. So how do we change that, and how do we fight that? And we need more stories.
So this is what we call whitewashing.
Oh yeah.
And Dave Chappelle said that once as he got more and more famous and successful, they were pushing him to include lighter white characters in his comedy, in the work that he was doing. So when they're pushing this agenda, pushing Black people to the front and putting white people in Black stories, um, it comes down to mainstream sales.
Yes.
So I mean, when an artist comes forward with their story and they have all Black characters like an Issa Rae, they're saying, okay, we'll buy your story, we'll put your story out, but we need to include some characters so that white people don't feel excluded and these kinds of things.
Yes. Consistently. Yes. All the time. And that's what I'm trying to help fight by helping create new stories, by helping create spaces where new stories can be told, and by consistently reminding people about certain stories that are missing or the erasure of stories that are missing.
What do you understand? Can you tell us a little bit about Ecuador and what you know about its history?
Well, I was only born there,
Yeah.
so I couldn't. It depends what you'd want me to tell you. I was just
Tell me
born
what
there.
you know.
I mean, not much because I was born there and I was less than 6 months. And I wasn't raised with an Ecuadorian,
Got
by an
it.
Ecuadorian family. My mom is Peruvian and my grandparents were Peruvian. And so I was raised in Peru more so than I was raised in Ecuador.
You
So,
know about Peruvian history?
yes, a lot more.
All right.
And
Tell us,
so
tell us about that.
Well, what do you want to know? Because again,
So,
we have like
so here's the
hundreds of
thing.
years of history.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? Most of us in America, we are kind of in this bubble, right? We went to social studies class. They probably mentioned, like, you probably had to color a map or something. And that's pretty much all they know. Like, no one knows anything. It's just like, do you know what's happening in Peru? No, they have no clue what's happening. So it's just to give some kind of context to the way you see or the way Peruvians talk about their history.
I mean, we're talking hundreds of years of history, so I can't necessarily go into full detail of all of that.
Well,
But
there's some amount of colonialization, right, and
yes,
European
absolutely.
involvement,
So you
and
have,
the aftermath of this.
of course, you have the Spaniards that come into Peru. Of course, you have colonization. You have the Spaniards take over the Incas, help sort of like obliterate the Inca Empire, betrayal, killing, diseases, all of that lovely stuff. You then have the Spaniards sort of like take over, and you have them settle. And so, of course, then you're looking at the settlers as criollos. You have caste systems that are starting to be put into placement based on people's background. Like if you're from Spain, you're Espanol. If you're from born in Peru, but to Spaniards are like a criollo. If you're mixed, you're called a mestizo. And like all of this caste system sort of starts to being created, which then starts to create socioeconomic differences between people. You still have a influx of slavery occurring, coming in from Brazil and other ports as well. And then, so you're really having a whole mixture of folks together um, in this sort of society that is emulating Spain. But then you have the fall of Spain and its empires. But what, for example, take Peru and Ecuador, which were both the whole area was Inca, and the Spaniards, they go and they split this area into two different countries, actually three if you count Chile. And so now you have like Ecuador, Peru, and Chile, and the Spaniards are then creating nationalism as a way of separation. And so then that creates rivalries between Ecuador and Peru. And all of this is done on purpose, of course, so that um, these countries don't
Exploitation.
unite. Yeah, these countries are. Meanwhile, the lands are being exploited, resources are being used, but Spain is still going broke regardless. Eventually, these countries end up being forming their own governments and trying to form their own systems, but they're already so behind because they've been exploited for so many years from land, resources, X, Y, and Z taxes that they had to pay to Spain, um, all of that sort of togetherness. And you fast forward, you had a early 19th century, you have a huge influx of Asians come into Spain. I mean, come into Peru. You have a large population of Japanese come in and start forming businesses and actually becoming very successful. And the Peruvian government, fast forward to World War II, the Peruvian government, who's predominantly white, doesn't like this. They make a treaty with the United States and they literally grab hundreds of Japanese Peruvians into boats and ship them into internment camps in the United States.
Mm.
And so that's like histories that aren't necessarily taught. Um, there's been sort of reconciliation that people towards working towards that. Huge erasure of there's a large indigenous population still in Spain, in Peru. There's large Afro population also. Peru took years before they acknowledged Afro Latinos in Peru, and it did do some work with reconciliation, but the amount of racism, well, I remember when I was little, and again, the separation of like certain neighborhoods by skin
Right.
tone was
Right.
very predominant. And you've had multiple uprisings, you've had multiple coups, you've had multiple terrorist groups. When I was growing up, you had a Sendero Luminoso who was killing people left and right, kidnapping people and killing them. And so the country has been in a lot of turmoil, and politically, they eventually had their first Japanese Peruvian president, Fujimori, but then there was all of this corruption in politics, and so it's been rough. It's been a lot of turmoil, and it's been rough. And I think the country is still trying to find itself.
So that story that you just described, in my experience and my research, that represents a lot of Jamaica, the Caribbean, and South America in general, right?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. This is not an isolated event into one country. This happens all over Latin America. Absolutely.
A lot of African American and people in general, they don't have a larger sense of history, and they don't have a larger sense of how, in the 1500s, when European started exploring and colonizing, all of these things that we're dealing with now is just this giant ripple effect, right? And so many countries now have what they call independence, but there's so much corruption,
Yep.
there's so much broken infrastructure, and there's still these financial deals, whether it's loans from the International World Bank, like all of these things are at play in these countries that won't allow them to reach an equilibrium where they can kind of grow and just move forward. So a lot of what's happening there leads these people to want to come to America because America is the quote unquote better. And when they come here, they find a similar version that they faced back home without some of the protections that were back home.
Yeah.
So here we are in the 21st century, and then I think a lot of the people here have an animosity to the people who are just getting here. So even though their story is similar and the enemy is the same, their lineage came through another country and they're just getting here. And
Mm-hmm.
we're not on the same page.
Yeah.
So right now, this is like a big thing, and the few is still in power, controlling the controlling controlling the resources.
Oh yeah. We're seeing that even in the United States, that here we have a country that's supposed to be the most powerful country in the world, but is it? I don't know.
And so much of the work you're doing is trying to tell this story, trying to give messages of hope.
Yeah.
How
Oh.
does the how does the LGBTQ movement interface with your work?
Well, people who are LGBTQ are all sorts of races and ethnicities, so you can't detach one from the other. It's not a separate movement, it's the same movement. Um, and if I'm talking about someone, I'm talking about someone as a whole. I'm not separating them because of their LGBTQ. I mean, if I'm talking about someone who's Afro Latino, I work with Afro Latinos who are LGBTQI. I work with Afro Latinos who are in the spectrum. I work Afro Latinos who are neurodivergent. I work with Afro Latinos who are light skinned. I work with Afro Latinos who are dark skinned. I work with Afro Latinos who were born here. I work with Afro Latinos who were not born here. So, I mean, I work with Afro Latinos who are younger. I work with Afro Latinos who are older. It's all interconnected. You cannot separate one or the other. And so it is all really interlaced. And so just because I'm focusing on one specific identity doesn't mean that I'm negating any others, because I'm still working with folks that are so many things. I could be working with Afro Latinos who are Catholic. I could be working with an Afro Latino who happens to be Muslim, right? And so, like, again, like, it's it's all intersected and interconnected, and it's everyone's fight. It isn't just one fight.
So the big word there is intersectionality, right?
Yes.
And this thing is at play, and I think a lot of people get caught up in that, and it's like a divide and conquer kind of thing. And
I don't understand why it would be. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you
right,
can't.
I mean, we both show up, we both want to be in the play, we both are working against white supremacy, and then it's like, well, you picked the older one, or the darker one didn't get it, the woman said that the man, you know what I mean, like all of these complexities and begin to interface.
I mean, that's white supremacy again at work, right? If you're going to put it at that, it's white supremacy at work. You can't separate a person. I mean, you can't cut a person into pieces because they form different parts of an identity. You can't do that. Um, that's who they are. So you take a person as a whole and you work with them as a whole. You can't just separate them and be like, I'm only going to advocate for this part of this person. That's stupid. You got to advocate for the entire whole and human being and who they are. And I don't understand anyone who is trying to dissect intersectionality and compartmentalize it doesn't know what intersectionality is. They haven't studied it and they haven't read a single book on it. So if that's your take on it, then you need to do some reading because you clearly don't know what it is. You don't separate people. It's not about separating people. It's about highlighting people as a whole and understanding that people are made up of multiple things. People are not made up of one thing. They're just not.
So how old were you when you came to the States?
I was 15.
And where did you land?
I was in New York and New Jersey.
So you blended in, I'm assuming, easily with the Latino culture.
No, I blended in with the black culture.
So what was that experience like?
Like any experience, they were my friends. I mean, it wasn't
You,
necessarily, there was, I mean, that's who my friends were, and that's who immediately accepted me and embraced me for who I was. Um, so that was just, it wasn't any different than my life previously. What was interesting was white people treating me as if I was something that was an eroticization or an anomaly or like something that did not fit. That was interesting. Um, because having grown up in Spain, well, I did experience discrimination because I was half Peruvian, half Spanish. Um, the discrimination I was experiencing in Spain wasn't based on skin tone. It was based on ethnicity and well, nationality. So it's really interesting to come to the United States and see white people put you in categories and see white people judge you and not know what to do with you because they don't know what you are. Um, no one in the black community did that. Everyone in the black community just accepted me and loved me. Like, so, you know, it was those were my friends. Like that was just that. Like no one in the white, the white community was the one that would question my identity and what I was or be eroticized or all of these different things. Um, black folks didn't. Black folks were just like, hi, come over here, come sit over here, come be, since day one. And so I think that that goes to tell you a lot about the discrimination that happens in this country because I wasn't being discriminated by black folk and I'm not black and they knew it and it didn't matter. They were open arms, boom, yes, come over here. I was being discriminated by white people consistently.
and how was your English? Did you
My English was not that good, but I worked on it and so now it's different. There's still words I can't say, um, but I knew that I had to work on my English. I did go to international school, so I did speak English and I did understand English and I could write English very well, but I still needed a lot of help. And I went to a school that had a learning center, so it was a school that worked with students with learning disabilities.
and what was your plan when you were about going to college? What was your plan?
Well, my original plan was that I was going to be a photojournalist and that I would travel the world and take photographs as a photojournalist. And I went to college and I took a theater course and I was in a play and that I always loved theater and that sort of changed things.
So were you into photography? You took a lot of pictures.
Yes,
Were
yes.
you
I had been a photographer for over, I would say, 15 years.
was there any particular area you wanted to work in, or you just
I was both a photojournalist and a sports photographer. So I did both. Sports photography I learned I did it for 5 years in college. I was very good, but it's a male dominant field. There are very, till this day, there are very few female sports photographers. So I just got tired of having to fight for, I just got tired. It just was really exhausting. And it was a fight I didn't want to fight at like 21 years old. I just didn't want to be consistently fighting my entire career to make a name for myself because I was a woman taking sports photography. I just didn't want to. And so I sort of let that go. And then with photojournalism, I love it, but you have to take the picture before you can help people. And so I had to make a choice and say, I think I'd much rather help people first and take the pictures second if I get a chance. If I don't get a chance, that's fine. I want to help people first, which is why I went into teaching.
What does that mean? You have to take the picture before you help them.
Well, if you don't take the picture, you miss the image, then you miss your job. So you've got to take a photograph. So if something is happening, like if something is about to happen to someone, you've got to take the photograph of that. Not, you got to take the photograph of that, not drop the camera and help them.
Okay, so it's more passive, taking pictures, and then after you have the image, you're like, "Can I help you now?" And you
Yes.
found yourself being more actionatory, jumping in, and like, "Oh, that would have been a good picture, but I was too busy in the mix."
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, where do you think is the best way for us to put our energy going forward as activists? How do you see this? What do we need to do? What is your outlook?
Well, right now, I think that we are in a space that is inundated with cancel culture that is not having conversations and instead is just canceling people. And if you don't agree with me, I'm just going to cancel you because my way is right and your way is wrong. There's no transformation in that. There's no growth in that. If we are not having conversations, we're not going to grow, we're not going to change. And maybe isn't growth. Maybe you have a conversation and the person doesn't change, but normally you have a conversation and the other person changes. Conversations lead to change. They really do. And we got to find ways of having conversations. And we got to also stop finding ways of breaking our own selves up. You are seeing a lot of activists and liberals um, up against each other's throats. You're not seeing that in the opposition. And so we are destroying our own selves ultimately. And who ends up winning is white supremacy.
Right. And right. So that's what I was saying. There's a lot of division and people arguing amongst themselves instead of being united against the opposition. Um, for me, I try to frame the issue that, like, what does the opposition really want? Like, is it just power, money? Like, sometimes I feel like what's happening is destroying humanity in a very like intentional way. It's not just about, okay, I want to have the most money, I want to have the most power. Like, if you have a whole generation that's not being educated, that's not going to give you more money, that's not going to give you more power.
Yeah, but they don't want to relinquish power, period.
So it's like I would rather be the captain of a ship going down than to share the ship with anyone.
Yes, absolutely.
So at some point, I think the 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 majority who is not in control and not organized, we have to take ourselves more seriously, I think, and really like step this up. And I always say that my biggest fear is that 100 years from now, we'll still be in a position where we're protesting and asking for better treatment. And I feel like we have to do something other than asking.
What do you feel like we have to do?
That's the question. I'm just one person, but I don't think the signs and the picketing and the looting and asking is going to get us where we want to go. like the school system's not getting better. They're not integrating us. They're not making our movies.
Well,
They're pushing us back.
we need to be in systems of power in order to create the change. We need to this past election had so many young folks that got involved into politics and that ran for office, right? It starts at, if you want to change the school system, it starts with the board. So who's on the board? Are you running for the board? Right? You want to change the school system? Are you running for your for the board? Do you want to change the town you live in? Are you running for the council? And it starts with things like that. I mean, they might seem small, but that's where the you start to learn how the system operates and how you can change the system. It ain't it's a lot of time, it's a lot of commitment, but that's where it starts to change. For me, I'm teaching on a consistent basis and trying to educate the next sort of set of minds stepping into spaces so that they can be having conversations about these things.
What do you feel like are you teaching, you're saying you're teaching the young minds to step into positions of power
Yeah,
and to make systematic changes, working together to empower themselves to shift?
absolutely, yes.
So do you feel like we're on a course to have this shift? So 100 years from now, we won't have these systems in place.
No,
So what's not happening? What's missing? What are we missing?
I don't know. I mean, I think what's really hard for me is going back to this. I'm seeing our own folks destroy our own folks and not stand together versus the opposition stands together regardless if it's against their best interest. Part of the problem is that we live in a capitalistic society, which um, premises the individual first. And so we've grown up with this capitalistic society, having the individual first, individual first, individual first on a consistent basis. So even when you work with certain people, even when you work with like collegiate youth, like I do, um, they might have a certain mindset when it comes to where they are right now in college, when their parents are paying for college. But then when they have to step out into away from the college bubble, all of a sudden they have to pay their own bills, they have to do this, they have to do that. And sometimes things change then. Things change. Or when all of a sudden you make X amount of money and you're being taxed for X amount of money, maybe you don't like that. Maybe you don't want to be taxed. Or maybe you have children, and all of a sudden, now that you have children, you want a system that benefits you and your children. So you will do whatever it takes to get that system to benefit you and your children, even if it means shunning others, and even if it means hurting others in the long run.
This is what we're up against, Daphne. And I'm very concerned about it. And what I'm doing is facilitating conversations. And I want to have people who are more passive step up. And I think a lot of people are not participating in community for a lot of reasons. And I want to see people participate more in community, hear the voices of the people around them, get engaged, find out what's going on with your neighbor,
Yeah,
your surrounding communities, these kinds of things. And
absolutely.
I'm holding this platform to be that reminder, be the change and to do that work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is is there a famous activist or some person in history that you look up to?
There are many. Many, many, many. Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, even just many. But even living, um, Angela Davis is living. But I love like Bell Hooks. I consider Bell Hooks an activist. Just, you know, James Baldwin, who's not alive. Just, there's so many folks that have been fighting for so long and fought their entire lives. Either take Angela Davis, she continues to fight no matter what. um, Bell Hooks has been writing about so many of these topics for years. Um, both these two women are alive, but take Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, they're not alive, but they were fighting their entire existence until the day they passed for change. And so, yeah, there are multiple activists that I look up to. And there's a lot of people right now doing a tremendous amount of activist work to try to create change and bring us back together.
Um, I think some of the steps that I like to do is creating events and having space for people to interact, having more face-to-face time.
Yes.
Less
Yes.
virtual things.
And that's what I was telling you, that the importance of having conversations, right? The importance of not canceling people and actually sitting down and having a conversation with someone. That is critical and very important, and we're not seeing that enough.
Um, so how has it been for you? I know you recently moved to the West Coast.
It's been really good. Um, I really love living here. I've wanted to live in the West Coast for a long time, and so I'm really happy that I've moved here and settled now, definitely into a nice little home, and excuse me, working a lot, a lot, but enjoying what I'm doing.
And you're a Iron Man.
I am indeed. I have not been training, mostly because of work, but I'm hoping to get back into that in the spring.
Which one did you do?
I did Lake Placid.
How was it?
It was, I thought it was fantastic because I trained for it, so I was ready, and I was like, yeah, bring it on, and I got it, and it was. If you train for it properly, it's an amazing experience.
What's your cat's name?
This one's Aiko.
Aiko. There's something about distance event and the type of meditation that you go through and the journey and the
Yes.
change and can you tell us a little bit about that and what it was like for you?
Um, Running, training, it does. I finished my dissertation while I was training for the Ironman. And so for me, it was a lot of work that revolved around taking breaks for myself. And when you're running, your brain thinks differently. You have a moment to breathe. All of these different things.
And it's for me, there's a lot of meditation, right? And it's like
Yes, that can come with that. Absolutely.
and there's also something I haven't done an Ironman, but there's something I've done marathons. So there's something about going through that journey, and I, I can't put it into words fully, but that experience of accomplishment,
Yes,
self-actualizing.
and pushing your body to a limit, right? Like you don't know that you're able to achieve this goal, and then you are able to achieve that goal, and pushing your mind and body to that moment. It's great. It is. It's very meditative and very helpful to clear the mind, to clear the thoughts, and so many reasons. Yeah.
And then there's something you enter this new level. I can't speak for you, but I think you enter this new level of yourself, and now that you take it into all your other work.
Yeah.
Like, you can't talk to me this way. I'm an Iron Man. It just.
Oh no, not that. If you give me 1 second, I am having my dog just had a little accident, so give me one moment. I have to
Go
stop.
ahead.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, take your time. So your baby's okay?
She is. I'm so sorry. She's just older. She's almost 15, and last year she had a massive surgery. So
Oh.
sometimes she has little accidents and she can't help it. She's over here feeling all guilty, but it happens. It's
What's
okay, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
what's
I
her
know.
name?
Her name is Nala. It's
Nala.
okay, baby girl. It's okay.
Okay. Um, you know, I'm I don't have all the answers, right?
Neither
I
do I. I'll tell you that right now. Neither do I.
there's been so many people who I respect doing a lot of important work. And it's just interesting that in this life that we're living in, we're fighting just to be actualized as humans, to just have access to the things that human beings need to exist. So it's interesting that we're in this struggle, and you have these people in your community, they're also in the same plight as you, and we're still trying to convince each other that we need to work together. And we've been taught all of this kind of self-hate and divide and conquer things that we're dealing with.
White supremacy at its most, right? White supremacy at its most.
And I know people are doing their work and doing the work, and we need to support each other. We need to
Yes.
support the work. We have to listen to each other. We have to go out of our way to knock on each other's doors, invite
Yes.
people to connect, meals, conversations, and just grow together, intertwine ourselves so that we can. I think we have to kind of like build ourselves up like a Voltron kind of thing to beat the final boss. I think that's where we're heading. And in the end, I don't want to see any kind of bloodshed. I want to see, everyone keep whatever they have and just have the poor people get access, get the things they don't have, and just, move past protests and, you know,
We still need protests, though. I mean, there's a couple examples just recently. For example, take here in the film industry, where you had all of the film industry workers about to strike, right? They were all literally about to, you had IATSE, and so they were all about to strike and protest. And because they were all about to walk out and strike and protest, they got their contract, right? And because that would have ruined TV and film, ruined, like they would have gone into ruin. Um, and that's a protest. So, yeah, we still need protest.
right.
And that protest worked. That protest absolutely worked.
So they were organized, they had a plan,
Yep.
and they were ready to implement their plan.
I mean, and you've got to also admit and give credit that Black Lives Matter protests have done a tremendous amount of good in this country and have woken up a lot of people in this country. And you've got to give credit where credit is due. And so you have a group of folks that have been joining Black Lives Matter and doing a tremendous amount of protest work and organization. And sometimes it's small and it's at the local level of change. Here in LA, the Black Lives Matter movement is huge, and they're doing a lot of local stuff when it comes to police. And there's been a lot of changes. And we definitely gotta give credit to all the protesters that have been going to the mayor's house every single day for X amount of time. So protests can work and can be very, very efficient. We also need legislation. We also need new laws. We also need people in positions of power. And all of that is slowly taking place. And we saw that with the last election.
I support protests, and it's a tool that we definitely need to use. It's an effective tool. I'm just hoping for the day when we don't need to protest and
Yep.
march to have water
Yep.
and a decent
Absolutely.
school for our kids to go to and fair wages and these kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
do you want to share some of your projects so that we can follow your journey? And
Well, right now I have I'm directing a play right now, and that's sort of like, well, my work is that's through the university. But this past summer I was able to direct a couple other works, and that was really exciting. Um, and I just do a lot of working of directing and dramaturgy of work. Excuse me. Oh, so sorry. I'm so sorry.
it's
It's
okay.
still early. It's still early for me in the morning. I know it's almost 11 o'clock, but
What time?
we'll get
Yeah,
there.
11 o'clock. Yeah, so share with me some of your projects and your links coming up, and I'd love
So
to.
Mostly I tell people to follow me on Instagram. Dr. Secret Loves Theater, because I always post all the projects that I do, and so that's the big one. And more than anything else, that's the ones that I sort of like post on. And I've just, like I said, I've just been working on directing a couple shows right now, and and writing. I've been writing, so I have to wait until let's see what happens with my writing and how I can get some things published and things of the sort.
I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
No, I just really hope that we can. I just said no, and I'm talking. So yes, I just really hope that we can have conversations, that we can sit down intergenerationally and talk about how do we come together, talk of finding, if need be, compromises and understandings with each other and one another so that we can grow and get stronger, um, because the fight is really ultimately with white supremacy and how do we end white supremacy. That's the ultimate fight, and if we're destroying in each other, we're never going to get there. So how can we support one another? How can we come together for the process and stand together? That's
That's
what I'm
the
hoping.
that's the work. Listen to each other, tell it like it is, and grow and be united.
Yes.
Daphne, thank you so much for taking your
Thank
time today.
you. Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
making this happen.
Thank
Happy to
you.
see you. Happy to know you're doing well. I love to see your work. I look forward to attending some of your things in the future.
Thank you. And let me know next time you're in LA.
I know. I've never been to LA. Can you believe it?
Ooh, you got to bring the family. It's fantastic. Y'all have fun.
Yes, I definitely am gonna make something happen soon. I had a podcast guest on from Atlanta, and after the conversation I booked the flight and I made it happen.
Yes. So make it
So
happen. Bring the kids. There's lots to do. I mean, you've got Disney, so there's lots to do. They're still at the age where they would still enjoy it. So,
exactly.
all
I
right.
hope
Well,
you
thank you so much for having me.
thank you so much. And thank you. I'm happy to see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.